Hi guys and welcome to this video. I finally had the chance to take out the R6 with me into the field to test it out thoroughly and see how it performs as a bird photography camera. When I got the R6 first, I noticed how similar the menu and most of the layout of the camera is compared to the R5. So I'm not going to go in depth through all the different features that the camera has and the settings because I've already done a thorough review of the R5 that shares most settings and most functions with the R6. So make sure to check out that video if you want to have an in-depth look into all the different features that the new Canon mirrorless cameras like the R5 and the R6 offer. To get the most out of the R6, I've set it up exactly the same way as my R5 with double back button focus and a few more very important settings that I've changed in the camera to get the absolute most out of it. If you want to set up your camera the same way, make sure to check out my video about how I set up my R5 with all the settings that I used there and also used for the R6. The only thing that you can't really do easily on the R6 is quickly change between photo and video, but more on that later. I got the R6 from my friend Dwight, who was nice enough to lend it to me for a while. So thanks for that, Dwight, and you should all make sure to check out his channel down there in the description. And we want to start with looking at some of the features of the R6 now that I found very useful in the field. The first feature we need to talk about is Animal Eye Autofocus. You may have heard about it by now, and in theory it sounds too good to be true, but when you use it in the field it's actually simply amazing. And it's a feature that I wouldn't want to miss anymore in any camera, and that puts the R5 and R6 ahead of any DSLR camera for me. Using Animal Eye Autofocus in the field is simply a game changer and has dramatically increased my keeper rates in the field doing traditional bird photography, but also especially when it comes to birds in flight photography. My keeper rate has more than doubled using Animal Eye Autofocus when doing birds in flight. So that has been a real revelation and definitely something I would not want to miss anymore at all. And the R6, just like the R5, performs perfectly with the Animal Eye Autofocus, and it's a real joy to use. So what does Animal Eye Autofocus do? The camera by itself identifies the bird's eye in your viewfinder and then follows it along automatically. You don't have to try to keep your autofocus field on the bird anymore like on a traditional DSLR camera. No, now the camera actually follows the bird's eye throughout your frame at all times. So this has been truly amazing because for birds in flight photography, it instantly finds the bird's head and then goes with the bird against many different backgrounds. And also for perch birds, it's been really amazing because you can now just focus on the bird and then recompose your image without having the fear of losing focus on the bird's head, because the camera stays on the bird's eye at all times, no matter which way you're moving your camera. So that has been really amazing and very, very useful in the field. The R6 is also a very fast camera with 12 frames per second in mechanical shutter mode and 20 frames per second in the electronic shutter mode. I've used both modes and they both work really well. The only thing you have to consider when using the very fast modes like the high plus mode or the electronic shutter mode, that your RAW files will only have 12 or 13-bit instead of 14-bit that you get from the slower mechanical shutter mode. So your RAW files are slightly compressed, but looking at the files overall, I didn't really notice a big difference. The main thing I noticed that when you're using the mechanical shutter mode, that some of the pictures are sometimes slightly out of focus, whereas when you're using the electronic shutter mode, almost every single file is sharp. That's a small difference that I noticed. It's not really a deal breaker, so I'd say use this mode over the other mode, but I did notice a little bit more consistency in the electronic shutter mode. The main thing I find annoying using the electronic shutter mode is that it doesn't make any sound at all, and sometimes you're not even noticing how many pictures you're taking. So I almost wish there was a bit of a fake shutter sound we could have with the electronic shutter mode. When it comes to all this speed, the R6 is also equipped with a large enough buffer, so there's no real problems that you're hitting the buffer even when you're shooting a lot of shots in a row. So I didn't really have any problems with that, and for normal purposes where you're just taking a few pictures, I basically never hit the buffer anymore, whereas this is something that continuously happened on DSLR cameras like the 5D Mark IV, where the buffer was a lot smaller and you would constantly hit it when you're trying to do birds in flight or shooting like a whole series of images. The R6 has dual SD card slots, so you can use your old slower SD cards, but if you're having an R6, I would probably recommend to buy the fastest SD cards you can get to make sure that the camera is writing really fast to those cards and you're not having any issues with the buffer or the camera writing to the cards for a long period of time. The R6 is also equipped with in-body image stabilization, which I've found to be very useful and very good, even in combination with the big lenses like the 600mm you see behind me, because it really helps me to stabilize the viewfinder even more than the normal image stabilization does. If you're hand holding a big lens, for instance, often the viewfinder is kind of all over the place, whereas with the IBIS and the image stabilization engaged, your viewfinder actually becomes nice and calm, and it's actually quite easy to use. I also found that IBIS very good when it comes to doing B-roll video, for instance, or handheld video with a wider angle lens, for instance, where it's nice and stable. And if you have a lens without any image stabilization, the IBIS will still give you some stabilization now. So that could be really nice for lenses like a 5.6 400mm Canon lens, for instance. Talking about video, the R6 does fantastic 4K 30, 4K 60 video, and all the video clips you are seeing throughout this video have been taken with the R6, and as you can see yourself, the quality is absolutely fantastic and it's been a joy to work with those video files. And of course, one key question with mirrorless cameras is always, how does the battery last? With the R6, I didn't really find battery life to be too much of a problem, but I would recommend for everyone using an R5 or an R6 to definitely buy a battery grip. It will help you with the ergonomics of the camera, but it will also help you with the battery life, because now you have two batteries in the camera, and then battery life should not be a problem. It should last you all day and a few thousand images. And of course, on the R6, just like on the R5, you will need an EF to EOS R adapter, where you can adapt your EF lenses to the EOS R cameras, unless you're using the new RF lenses, but the RF lens lineup is still not that big, so most of you will probably adapt their EF lenses, but all the adapted lenses work perfectly fine on the camera, and I basically don't see much of a difference at all. The quality's just like those lenses on a DSLR camera, so using an adapter is absolutely not a problem at all and nothing to be afraid of. So that brings us to the final question and the most important one. Are 20 megapixels enough for bird photography? I'm actually a bit torn on this question, so I was really looking forward to see how the R6 performs in the field and how the files look on the computer. And to do so, I took the R6 into a deep dark rainforest where I had to use up to 12,800 ISO to get sharp images. And I also took it with me on a nice sunny island to photograph cool looking Cape Barren geese. So I have very different scenarios where I have some flight shots, some rainforest images, and some shots of more stationary geese to really see how the camera performs in the field, how the files look like, and how much ability I think I have to crop images. So how did the camera perform in the field? The EVF was nice enough to work with. There was not much of a blackout or lag between the shots. The only time you really notice a blackout or a bit of a lag is if you're panning really quickly with the bird when you see it shooting like a series of flight shots where it kind of feels a little bit chopped in your viewfinder, and you have to anticipate a little bit the movement of the bird to stay on the bird. So that is not as smooth as a DSLR, but overall I think it's definitely easy to deal with and you get used to it pretty quickly. The animal eye autofocus worked amazingly well. I got really nice and many keepers, so that was a great joy to work with. The camera is fast. I didn't have any problems of the buffer filling up. So overall my experience in the field was really good. I'm looking forward to looking at the images with you now. So you can see the first image of a eastern yellow robin. As you can see, it's actually a little bit too dark, and the auto white balance of the camera really didn't work well at all in the rainforest. After changing the settings to manual white balance, the files started to look a lot better. So that's something that I noticed, that the camera really didn't work well with the auto white balance. As you can see, this eastern yellow robin posed beautiful for us. When we zoom in, it's really nice and sharp. This will look really nicely once it's edited. as you can see here. And if you want to know how to edit your images so they look absolutely amazing, just like these images, make sure to check out my masterclass down there in the description. I know it will help you to transform your images into real masterpieces. So then the second robin even came to the perch. As you can see, the camera nicely stayed on the first bird with the eye autofocus, and the second bird is out of focus obviously because the depth of field at 6.3 wasn't enough to get both birds into focus. But then when it's come up a bit more, you can see the camera still nicely stayed on the first bird even when it hopped around, still nice and sharp. And then we got both birds on the perch. Now they're in the same focal plane, so they're both sharp, giving me some really nice images. And then you can see here, I swapped over the camera onto my 600mm lens and also went to manual white balance, giving me much more pleasant looking images. So if we zoom in, this lens also performed really well on my 600mm lens, giving me nice and sharp images with fantastic details. As you can see here, look at all the details on the perch and the lovely bird. And then we had another really cool bird coming in, a white-throated tree creeper that was hopping all over the perch, and the eye autofocus actually struggled a tiny bit more to stay on the bird. It lost it once, but overall it still performed very well. You can see here it was hopping onto the side of the perch, giving me all sorts of really nice poses. As you can see here, very nice and sharp, great details, great image with a great pose. This will look really nice edited. See again here. And the other thing I think you should notice in these images is they're all shot at ISO 6400. And when we zoom into them, there's hardly any noise visible at all. Here's another example where the tree creeper jumped behind the perch, but the camera nicely stayed on the eye, ignoring the perch, not just focusing on the perch, for instance. So clicking through all these, you can see that there's hardly any noise visible at all in the image shooting at ISO 6400, which was really great to see. So here's an image at ISO 6400 where the robin came really close. You see basically no noise, stunning details. And then I went to ISO 12,800, 7.1 400th of a second with my 600mm lens. And look at this, there is still hardly any noise visible in the picture at ISO 12,800. That's pretty amazing, isn't it? You get beautiful, clean files at such high ISOs. And shooting in a dark rainforest, this was a real game changer. Here we have another beautiful series of eastern yellow robins where two birds landed on my perch. How cool is that? Usually the robins don't really like sitting close to one another, but here's, I think it's the dad with one of the babies. It's shot at ISO 6400, 600mm, f6.3, 400th of a second. If we zoom into that, beautiful sharp images, and if we just click through them, you can see how the eye autofocus just really nicely stayed on the bird the whole time. And we can just look at the images as a whole as well. Don't be confused by the little blue bubble, that's just my cursor moving around. You can see some really fun and cool images that will look really amazing edited. And I wouldn't worry about this black dark spot up here. I'd either crop that out or paste a little bit of background over the top of my final image, so that wouldn't be any worry to me. And here we have one of the young robins that just sat a bit lower on the perch, but another image that I really like with that little bit of fern coming up from the ground, that perch with all the moss, and then just a cute little bird here on the side. And again, the eye autofocus picked it up beautifully, getting us some really nice images, again with the manual white balance, same settings, 400th of a second, 6.3, ISO 6400, 600mm. I think overall some really nice images. A little bit of struggle at the beginning with the auto white balance, but once I changed to manual white balance, I got some really nice looking images, and I was really impressed how the camera performed in these really dark settings. In the past, when I've gone to this spot with my 5D Mark IV, for instance, the autofocus always struggled a little bit and I could just not use the same high ISO with so much confidence. Whereas here now I can shoot at 12,800 ISO without any problems or concerns, giving me fantastic images even in really dark environments. So that has been really great, and let's look at some of the images from the island. So here we have a few shots of a Cape Barren goose now. It's a really cool waterfowl from the sort of southern areas of Australia and Tasmania, and these birds in this area are pretty tame, so I can get quite close to them. So I thought they're the perfect test subject to see how the camera performs, because I could get full body shot but also some headshots. So here's a full body shot. So you can see here, it's already a little bit of heat haze coming up, so the file is not 100% sharp, but overall it's still pretty sharp, and I can zoom in nicely, giving us a nice file with nice details and nice colors. And this is always something that I say, that heat haze is one of the main things that affects the quality of your camera. So as soon as the sun comes up a bit higher, warms up the ground, you just have a little bit of heat haze coming through your frame, making your images slightly less sharp, or even sometimes severely less sharp than what they could be, and there's nothing you can do about it other than waiting for it to cool down a little bit. So this image was shot at 600mm f8 ISO 400 1600th of a second. Overall, really nice looking image. And now here we have a nice headshot of the goose when it came quite close. The beautiful two-tone background shot at ISO 400 f8 1600th of a second. When we zoom into that, we see really beautiful detail, nice detail in the beak and nice detail in that red eye and all the feathers on the face. So overall, really nice image quality. Here's the same goose when it kind of stood up even more with a nice two-tone background again. Zooming into that, beautiful sharpness, some really nice image quality. Here's a bit of a side-lit goose when it was just sitting down in the grass, but the eye autofocus picked up the head perfectly, picked up the eye perfectly, giving us really nice sharpness and really nice details. Here, the same goose when it was lying down, but again, no problem at all for the autofocus. It instantly focused on the eye, giving me some really nice shots, really nice results. And here, one of the younger geese was really curious, came really close. As you can see here, again, stunning details, a little bit less depth of field because the bird was so close, but overall, amazing details. Here's the mum looking at the baby, thinking what's going on. But if we zoom into that again, camera found the eye really quickly, and we have some really nice image quality. The only thing I noticed with the geese, sometimes they have the yellow beak with that big black nostril right in the middle, and at times the camera would kind of mistake that for the bird's eye, because I guess it kind of looks like an eye, but overall that wasn't really a problem. And whenever that happened, I quickly let the focus go, made sure I point the camera more towards the eye, press the button on the rear again, and it would pick up the real eye. So it's not really a problem, but at times I noticed with a lot of different birds, the nostrils seem to look very similar to eyes to the camera, and at times it will focus on the nostril. And as I said, whenever that happens, you have to let all focusing go, refocus, and then it will be fine. Don't try to keep focusing and move the camera around, it will just not work. So far, I didn't have an extensive period of time to test it for birds in flight, but from what I've seen so far, it performs just as well with the animal eye autofocus as my R5 does. So I'm very confident that it will do an outstanding job in tracking and acquiring birds. And with all birds in flight photography, what's important is to always pre-focus on an area to where you expect the bird to kind of come into your viewfinder. So you don't want to have your camera fully defocused and then you're trying to find the bird in the sky. That's almost impossible. Generally, I would say pre-focus, pick up the bird, then let the focus go, follow the bird, and refocus when it's coming close to your target zone, so you can be sure that it acquires the focus at the right point in time to get the best results. So here's just a series of a young gull flying past me, and as you can see, the busyness in the background now doesn't distract the camera at all. This is something where a lot of DSLR cameras in the past would have instantly started to focus on the ocean or the island, whereas here the waves or that little island in the background have been not a problem at all for the camera. And as you can see, the only person or the only thing that's struggling here is kind of me trying to keep the bird in the viewfinder, but the camera perfectly keeps focus on the bird's head and lets me follow the bird around. And again, I'm losing it now, but overall this wasn't the most difficult bird to track, but it still shows you that the camera, even against that busy sort of water background with an island behind the bird with the same kind of color and everything, the camera perfectly stuck to the bird, not struggling or not jumping onto the background. So it's, for me, also a really great bird and flight camera. And whenever I try it against my 5D Mark IV, for instance, the R5 or the R6 totally outperform when it comes to bird and flight photography, and my keeper rate has gone up dramatically because the camera just sticks to the bird and it's very hard to kind of glide off onto the background, whereas in the past with the traditional autofocus I often had the problem that I get a few flight shots and then the camera would just lose the bird, and that really doesn't happen anymore. So how do I feel about the R6 now that I've used it in the field? I must say I'm actually impressed with this camera. It is a really nice little camera with a great price point and super nice performance in the field. The animal eye autofocusers worked really well. It's fast with a large enough buffer. It takes fantastic video and great images with low noise and fantastic details. So all in all, I think it's a really nice camera for most people. I've also never felt during the time I've been using it so far that 20 megapixels wasn't enough for me to use. I must say I've been pretty close to all the birds so far, so I haven't really been in a situation where I had to crop a lot, but thus far the 20 megapixels never really felt like they would be holding me back in any sort of scenario. If I had to crop a lot, I still have some concerns or reservations when it comes to 20 megapixels, but I think overall this camera is a really fantastic tool for most people. Did I like everything about the R6? Not at all. There were a few things that really annoyed me, but they only really showed up when I directly compared the R6 to the R5. So I want to make that the topic of my next video, where I directly compare the R5 to the R6, so you can make up your mind which will be the perfect bird photography camera for you. I didn't want to include it in this video because as a standalone camera, the R6 is really nice, and only when I compare it to the R5, a few things show up that can be quite annoying or make me personally lean still towards the R5, but I will show you all of those in the next video, so make sure to hit that subscribe button to stay up to date with my videos. Leave me a comment down there. Do you have the R5? Do you have the R6? What do you think of the cameras? How you're liking your cameras? Are you considering to upgrading to the R6? Let me know in the comments. Smash that like button and I will see you very soon. Enjoy your day. Bye.